Welcome back. This time we're talking about Ghost in the Shell, the new live-action remake of the classic anime film, which in turn was based on a popular manga series. This is a project that's been met with no small amount of controversy since it was announced that Scarlett Johansson would be playing the main character of Major, a character who was Japanese in both the manga and the anime. And for better or worse, I'm going to do my best to stay away from that controversy. You probably have an opinion one way or the other on that, and nothing I say is probably going to change that. I'm here to talk about this movie, both as a film and as an adaptation, and that's what I plan to do. First, I want to talk about this new Ghost in the Shell as a movie itself. How does it hold up as a sci-fi, cyberpunk, mystery, action-adventure film? Honestly, pretty good. It's a pretty entertaining movie with interesting characters, a interesting setting, this giant city that everything takes place in, and a decent enough story to carry off this cyberpunk action-adventure film. The story focuses on Major, who, as I said, is played by Scarlett Johansson in this film. In this version of the story, Major is the very first person to have her brain transplanted out of her body, which was damaged in an accident, and placed within a cybernetic replacement. In this world, people get all kinds of cybernetic upgrades and implants, but this is the very first time that a brain is the only biological matter left of a person. The Major works for Section 9, which is an agency within the government that investigates a variety of crimes involving computers and the internet and cybernetics. Her partner is Bato, played by Pilou Asbæk, and they are called in to investigate a series of murders in which the companies of this cybernetics company are being attacked by their robots. And it just so happens that this company is the one that built and created, for the lack of a better word, Major. And their prime suspect is this enigmatic hacker named Kuze, played by Michael Pitt, although it's unclear at first exactly what his motivations are. Now, as I said earlier, overall, this was an enjoyable film, actually more so than I was expecting, because I really was tempering my expectations going into this. And I don't mean this as a backhanded compliment. Some of the best things this film has going for it are the visuals. This is a film that has a very strong sense of place. This city, which is never named, and a country which is never named, is very visually compelling. The film is directed by Rupert Sanders, who gave us Snow White and the Huntsman, which was a film that I had issues with the story and some of the acting, but as far as visually goes, it was a very interesting movie that, again, had a very concrete sense of place. In Ghost in the Shell, this helps us buy into this somewhat familiar but definitely very strange world in which most people have cybernetic implants and they literally wire into the internet, with some people living essentially their entire lives in a cyber world. And for the most part, the story is actually somewhat interesting, although it does fall into some of the tropes that I personally don't enjoy in these type of procedural crime mystery films, which I know is sort of a basic way of looking at that, but even if you look at the original Ghost in the Shell, if you strip everything else away, it was a mystery. And what that film did, and what a lot of good mysteries do, is they have people investigate these crimes, and we see how that affects the people who are doing the investigating. And again, that can be said definitely for the original Ghost in the Shell, and even for its sequel, Ghost in the Shell 2 Innocence, without the main character being directly involved in the mystery itself. That's just something that I honestly don't particularly like that much, and that's something that does happen here. But taking it into account that it's a story trope that I don't particularly like, I thought they handled it pretty well. So if you're not familiar with the original films or the anime or the manga, and you just are looking for a pretty cool action film with good visuals, an interesting story, and some interesting characters, I don't really see a reason why you're going to come out of it thinking it wasn't very good, because it's actually a pretty decent movie. My main complaint against Ghost in the Shell as a film in and of itself is some problems with the visuals. I said earlier that this is a very visually stunning movie, and it is, and for the most part, the visuals hold up very, very well. So when they don't, they're doubly glaring. And there were 2 or 3 instances where I really felt the special effects let the film down, especially compared to what they had been able to do earlier. And unfortunately, all of those instances occurred in basically the climactic scene of this movie, which is the worst possible time to be distracted by substandard special effects. But really, aside from that, that was my main complaint about this as a film itself. So now let me talk a little bit about this as an adaptation. If you're a fan of the movies, are you going to like this movie? That's actually a much harder question to answer because it really depends on how passionate you are about the original films and really what drew you to those films and what you took out of those films after watching them. Now, the basic story is very similar to what happens in the original Ghost in the Shell movie, with some significant changes and some things that get pulled from Ghost in the Shell to Innocence, which again were both based on the original manga, which I haven't read. This film actually is credited to the manga, not the films, despite there being some very specific scenes that were pulled from especially the first film into this one. There are a number of scenes that are pulled almost directly from the first movie. And then there's a lot of other things that might not be beat for beat the same, but there are definitely things that are pulled from the second movie, or at least from the same chapters of the manga that film was based on. There's certain characters, certain situations, down to one character smokes a cigarette and puts it out in a glass filled with, I'm assuming what was once water, but now is just water filled with other cigarette butts. It's a very quick little cutaway thing that's pulled almost directly from Innocence. Now, aside from the specific story elements, the biggest difference between this film and the earlier two is the sort of philosophical deep end of those stories. You're not going to find that here. And honestly, I wasn't expecting to find that here because, I mean, this is a different movie than what those movies were. It has a different purpose. It has different goals. And you can complain from the end to the end of time that is a problem, and it might just be, but you have to know, going into a Hollywood-made Ghost in the Shell movie, we are not going to have 6 or 7 minute long discussions about deep philosophical issues that are quoting Milton and the Bible and Descartes like we did in especially Innocence. And I say this as someone who has not read the manga. So I'm kind of going out on a limb here, but I believe that a lot of those deeper philosophical issues, yes, there was always sort of this, what does humanity mean? What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be an android? I'm sure it was all there in the original manga, but the deeper issues, I think, came from Oshii, who directed the original Ghost in the Shell film as well as the sequel, because he got full screenwriting credit for Innocence, and that's where that film went deep into the philosophical side of things. So if taking this as a film that's an adaptation of the manga, I can understand why that's not there, in addition to just that's not what the U.S. market is looking for in this type of movie. Now, as far as the story itself, again, I said in the first half of this review that I prefer these sort of procedural mystery films to not have the main character actually be part of the mystery. The mystery can definitely affect the investigators, say like in Seven or Silence of the Lambs, but in neither case were they the mystery. They were affected by it. In this case, the Major it's pretty obvious from very early on in this film that she is part of the mystery. And honestly, the mystery is not that much of a mystery. It's pretty clear what's going to happen in this film, and for the most part, it did. As someone who has seen the movies, it was interesting that this film almost at times seemed to purposely lead us in a direction that we would expect, having seen the original films, and then going in a different direction. So all in all, I think I'm probably going to be on the minority of people who really did enjoy the films and saying that I actually had a decent bit of fun with this movie. Is it as deep? Definitely not. Is it something that, like the original film, more than 20 years later, we're going to still remember as this groundbreaking piece of filmmaking? No, it's not. Is it an entertaining cyberpunk action adventure with some mystery thrown in? Yes. And honestly, that's what I was expecting from this movie. You could say I went in with low expectation. That's probably the case. But it met what I was expecting to come out of this and actually was a little bit higher than that, so I actually enjoyed it. So with all that said, let me turn it over to you now. What did you think of this movie? Are you a fan of the original movies? Are you coming in this completely cold? What did you think about it? Did you think it had enough weight to it? Obviously, it could have had more, but do you think it had enough to hold up this film and have it be enjoyable? As always, you can subscribe to my channel, check out some other reviews, and until next time, I'll see you at the movies.